Hey y'all, our last life sciences topic, we're going to talk about the history of life and the fossil record. So hopefully today you can pretend like you're a paleontologist and enjoy the ride. So let's do it. Science rocks.
All right, get out that science notebook. Remember to take notes and draw pictures as you follow along. Go ahead and copy down these 17 vocab words. They go in ABC order like this. Remember to just come back later and create your own definition of these words. Use your own words like always and draw pictures. So go ahead and pause this if you need to finish writing down the vocab words. So, scientists can study the fossil record to learn about the history of life on Earth. So, the fossil record provides evidence of how life on Earth has changed over time. Patterns in the fossil record document the existence, the diversity, extinction, and change in life forms throughout the history of Earth. The geologic record indicates that the first life forms appeared in the Hadean geologic eon and were bacteria capable of living without oxygen. Okay, so there were bacteria were the first life forms and they could live without oxygen. The first cells were most likely organisms that fed on organic molecules. Evidence of these early life forms can be found in rock like structures called stromatolites, such as these ones in the image. Okay, these wavy structures were created by the secretions of ancient bacteria. Evidence of the first organisms that could make their own food via photosynthesis dates back to the Archean geologic eon. At this time, a type of microscopic organism developed that was able to split water molecules, which released oxygen into the atmosphere as a waste product. So previously, oxygen had been virtually absent in the atmosphere. Okay, so bring on the oxygen breathing animals after that. Okay. The fossil record indicates that the first organisms on Earth all lived in the oceans. So, once oxygen breathing organisms appeared in the fossil record, land dwelling organisms soon followed. Eventually, soils on land became richer in organic material, which led to even more diverse life forms being able to live on land. All right, variations exist in every population. When variations help an organism survive, more organisms with those variations are likely to be produced. So, this causes the characteristics of a species to change over time. When variations hinder an organism's ability to survive, fewer organisms with those variations are likely to be produced, which may lead to extinction. So, over time, horse populations changed and developed hoofs to better handle rougher terrain. So, longer legs to better run from predators, and stronger teeth to grind tougher grass. Okay, so over time, the ones that had those characteristics lived long enough, okay, to reproduce and produce horses with those same characteristics, okay, that enable them to live longer in their environment. So, fossil evidence is typically used to show the course that such changes took through the past. This picture shows the fossilized remains of organisms that were once alive. And this picture shows traces or imprints of organisms that were once alive. Okay, so fossil remains, okay, and then traces or maybe imprints. Fossils are most commonly found in sedimentary rock, which forms as layers of material settle upon each other. They press together and harden over time. Okay, as time passes, new layers form upon the older layers. right? And the fossils are buried deeper and deeper in the ground, all right? Therefore, fossil age increases with depth. So here's the oldest layer with the types of fossils, and year after year those layers build, and here's the youngest layer with those fossils. Diagrams such as this one can be used to display the history of a species. This is called a cladogram. So each fork on a diagram represents the divergence of two species from a common ancestor, okay? So the fewer forks that separate two species, the more closely related the species are. So according to this, a lamprey and a tuna are more closely related than a lamprey and a kangaroo. All right. These can also show when certain traits appeared. Okay, and here's some traits right here. So the diagram shows that the trait of a backbone, right here, the trait of a backbone, emerged before the appearance of the tuna fish. Okay, the trait of a backbone emerged before the appearance of a tuna fish. Okay, so therefore the tuna fish and all the following organisms in the diagram have a backbone. Okay, and then another trait is paired legs. Paired legs is a trait that appeared before the bullfrog. Okay, so the bullfrog and all of these organisms would have paired legs. Okay, would the tuna and the lamprey have paired legs? No. All right, because this is over time. Paired legs appeared here right before the appearance of bullfrogs. All right, and like mammary glands appeared here, and so these two organisms are the only organisms that would have mammary glands. Okay, they would still have all of these traits as well. Okay, so if you take the characteristics and go to the right, all of the organisms to the right of that characteristic would have that. Much can be learned by comparing the structural similarities and differences of living organisms. All right, something called homologous structures. Homologous structures are structures found in one species that have the same basic structure and embryonic origin as those found in another species. So, if homologous structures are found in two different organisms, the species are likely to be related, even if only distantly related. Okay, so organisms with homologous structures share a common ancestor, but at some point their ancestral histories have separated. Okay, so right here, the forelimbs of 5 mammals are presented. All right, the bones are color coded to allow for easy comparison among these different species. Okay, so we can call that homologous structures. Okay, vestigial structures, so we can write this out. Vestigial structures are non-functional remnants of features that were once operational in a distant ancestor. These structures help establish ancestral pathways for modern organisms. So, for example, the presence of a vestigial pelvic girdle in femur in snakes and in whales implies that snakes and whales descended from animals that possibly walked on land. Okay, because the presence of these structures were not harmful to the organisms. Okay, it's just kind of hanging out there. There was no reason for the structures to completely disappear. They just do not serve a function anymore. All right, comparative embryology is the study of similarities and differences in embryologic development among species. So, to a certain extent, the history of organisms can be seen in the development of embryos. Okay, by locating similarities in development, scientists can determine if species are related, even if only distantly. So, for instance, gills are present in all vertebrate embryos at some stage of development. So, this common feature likely means that all vertebrates are descended from a common fish like organism. So, the physiology of related organisms is extraordinarily similar. So, for example, certain organs, such as the liver, function the same way in all mammals. So, this suggests that all mammals are descended from a common ancestor whose liver functioned in the same way as the livers found in current mammal species. Make sure to check out this video sometime regarding evolution. And I am aware that you might believe or not believe all things science, but becoming educated can only strengthen your particular point of view. So, whether you believe one thing or another, knowing all different aspects can help your argument if you are in some sort of debate. All right, let's do some practice questions. This is an example of a cluster question. So you'll have all this info and then it'll ask a few questions over the same info. All right, so let's study this information first. To answer questions about Earth's history, students looked at rock samples from different layers of the ocean floor. The rock samples contain fossils of very small ocean organisms called forams. Some of the rock formed during the Cretaceous time period, from 145.5 to 65.5 million years ago, before an event called the KT extinction. So, the rest of the rock formed during the Tertiary time, from 65.5 to 35.4 million years ago, after the KT extinction. So, in their investigation, the students measured the lengths of the foram fossils in the rock samples. The graphs show the size ranges of the foram fossils in rock samples from each time period. Okay, so up top, we've got the size distribution of foram fossils found in the Tertiary rock. Okay, and you've got the length of fossil in millimeters down on your x-axis. And then on your y-axis, you've got the number of fossils, and they did a bar graph. Okay, so looks like there were 6 fossils that were very, very little, okay? And there were no fossils that were a little bit bigger, right? Okay, and that's in the Tertiary rock. And then down here on this graph, you've got the size distribution of foram fossils found in the Cretaceous rock. So same thing, down on your X, you have the length of the fossil in millimeters and the number of fossils on the Y-axis. Okay, something that stands out. You've got all sorts of different lengths of fossils, okay, in the Cretaceous rock. All right, you've got maybe fewer. You've got 2 of this length that's pretty small. You've got 4 of this length that's still pretty small. You have 1, okay, of the little bit larger length in fossils. All right, so remember that information and let's answer some questions over it. All right, so first question over that information. Based on the information, how are the foram fossils from the 2 time periods different? All right, and I put these graphs on here for you again. So here's the 2 time periods, the Tertiary rock and the Cretaceous rock. And so how are the foram fossils from these 2 different time periods different? So pause it and see what you come up with. All right, I'm going to look at B. The Cretaceous fossils show a greater variety of body forms than the Tertiary fossils. Okay, it has at least 1 fossil in each length, okay, that's given. So a greater variety. The Tertiary rock just has 2. Second question over that information. Which statement is supported by the data in the two graphs? So once again, I put the two graphs here for you. Which statement is supported by the data in the two graphs? So pause this and see what you think. All right, after looking through all the answer choices, let's go with C. Forum body length. Okay, here's the length down here. Decreased, and many forum types disappeared between the Cretaceous and the Tertiary periods. Okay, so the body length decreased between the Cretaceous and the Tertiary periods. So see how in the Tertiary period, only the super short body lengths were there. Okay, so the body length decreased. And many different types disappeared. So these types with the longer body length aren't even seen in the Tertiary period. Number 3, what can be told about the age of the fossils in this diagram? What can be told about the age? Okay, notice at the bottom it has it labeled out 1 and then it goes up from there 2, 3, 4, 5. So what can be told about the age of the fossils? So pause this and see what you come up with. All right, rock layers are deposited from the bottom to the top. So therefore, rock layers are the oldest at the bottom and they're the youngest at the top. All right, so D, fossils in layer 1 right here are the oldest, and fossils in layer 5 up here are the youngest. Number 4, the following diagram shows the relationships between certain types of organisms. So the red lines represent a common ancestor that was the first organism to have the trait listed. So for example, sea stars, okay, sea stars do not have spinal cords. Okay, but the organisms that come after do have a spinal cord. So the spinal cord characteristic was right here in time. So all of these organisms that come to the right or after that would have a spinal cord. Okay, so we have seahorses. All right, seahorses have a spinal cord. Check. They have jaws. Check. And they have bones. Check. But they do not have lungs. Okay, I'm going to put like an X on lungs. All right, so which of the organisms in the diagram is most closely related to seahorses? Knowing all that information. So pause it and see what you come up with. All right, so organisms that are closely related tend to share more characteristics. All right, so let's see. The perch right here shares more traits with the seahorse than any other pair of organisms. Okay, so if we look at the perch and we think about the seahorse, all right, they both contain a spinal cord, right? Because the spinal cord came here, so the perch has that. They both contain a jaw, so the perch has that. They both contain a bony skeleton, so the perch has that. Okay, we talked about how the seahorse does not have lungs. Well, neither does the perch. All right, so we are going to go with C. All right, number 5, last question. And I noticed something that we need to change. So the following table represents information about 3 different species. Okay, the raccoon, the coati, and the ring-tailed lemur. So 2 of them are closely related. Which of these animals is not closely related to the other 2? Okay, so we have 3 species, the raccoon, the coati, and the ring-tailed lemur, and 2 of them are going to be closely related. So which one is not closely related to the other 2? So you need to read about all of these characteristics and see what you think. All right, so the ring-tailed lemur is the only one of these animals that is not a member of the same family. All right. So, how did I know that? I went through this information. Raccoons and coati can both rotate their ankles by 180 degrees in order to climb down trees head first. So, lemurs cannot do this. All right. And then lemurs, like other primates, have opposable thumbs, which raccoons and coati do not. Finally, the raccoons and coati have claws, while the lemurs have nails. All right, so all of these things indicate that the lemur is not as closely related to the other animals as they are to each other. So we're going to go with A. All right, after you have fully mastered the fossil record and history of life and everything to do with that, you should be able to create a project, a presentation, an experiment, a model, a debate, something to let your teacher know that you know what you're talking about. So, good luck, Science Rocks.